John will be at the game, of course. He, along with Scott Grayson, covering the game for 97.3 ESPN.com. And, John, we were just talking to the people in Atlanta before you jumped on here, and one of the big things that one of the big takeaways from that was that they feel that their defense is a lot different than the defense. In fact, they think it's a considerable better defense than they had last year. And we talked a lot about they play a lot of cover 3 here, but they think their personnel is a year older and a year better. 9 of their 11 starters are guys that have been drafted there. So that, to me, is something, because when we talk about Atlanta, it's Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Freeman. We don't talk a whole heck of a lot about the personnel and that defense. But let's start with their defense, a top 10 defense. What do you think about that Atlanta defense?
Yeah, it's definitely much improved. I think a lot of it is, and I talk about this with a number of teams, I think people sort of undervalue being in a particular system, and they've been in it now for a longer period of time, so they feel more comfortable with it. And you saw that in Philadelphia with Jim Schwartz, same thing. The more you play in a particular system, especially your core guys, the more comfortable you get with it, the more you understand what they're trying to accomplish, and the better you get. So I think in a lot of ways they're in the same boat as the Eagles in taking a step forward defensively. And the second part of that is they've been able to get Dan Quinn some of the players and with the skill sets that he wants to run that Seattle defense. And once you get that and get players who could run around and who can play the scheme they want, it tends to show up in improvement, and you've seen that.
John, this Atlanta team has gone 8-2 over the last 10 games. They beat, I guess it would be 7-2. They beat the Rams, the Saints, the Panthers, Seahawks, Cowboys. I mean, they've had some nice wins. They've been playing really good football here over the last 2 months of the season. And that's another thing that the guy from Atlanta, Matt Tabik, brought up with us was, they've really been playing. They were 4-4. 8 games in, they were a 500 team. They've been playing some high-level games just about every single week leading up to this game. I mean, almost every week has been a playoff-type game for them, where the Eagles have kind of cruised for such a long time. And you wonder if that kind of momentum and that kind of level of play can end up being the difference in somebody's season, where one team has really had a lot of high-level games in terms of meaningful, and the Eagles have kind of been, they've been ahead of the pack for quite some time now.
Yeah, I mean, it could. I hear that argument, and I know Matt a little bit from Falcons.com, and I know they're very excited down there. They have been playing better, but it can go two ways. It could also wear on you, the fact that you've been playing those types of games in that high-pressure environment and that high-profile environment week after week. They did have a bit of a Super Bowl hangover, and they struggled early in the move from Kyle Shanahan to Steve Sarkisian. But then, I look at it, they had that run sort of midway through the season when they were clicking on all cylinders offensively. They were scoring 30 points, I think 3 straight games. Then they kind of ran into Minnesota. And ever since then, they've been in the low 20s. I think Minnesota held them to under 10. And then they've been in the low 20s. So I don't think they're nearly as explosive as they were last season. But arguably, as we mentioned earlier, they're better defensively. I will say it's not your typical, and I said this earlier in the week, it's not your typical number 6 seed. They're better than that. And that's part of the issue with being in the NFC side of the playoffs this year, is that it is so deep, and that's borne out by the fact that the Falcons are a very good football team. But I think there's a narrative going around that the Eagles don't have a chance, and I don't buy into that. I really don't.
John, is a reason you don't buy into that, the playoff experience that's on the Eagles roster? Because if the Falcons were in the Super Bowl last year and you say, well, Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, some of those guys have been in big games before, the Eagles are pushing that. They have 24 guys on their active roster that have playoff experience, that there is playoff experience up and down the roster.
No, it's more, to be honest, yes, it's going to be at Lincoln Financial Field. And the Eagles have played that well at home this season. And you can throw out Week 17 because they didn't try to win the game. So essentially, they were undefeated at the Link. And they were lights out defensively all season at Lincoln Financial Field. Now we've been going back and forth with the weather. It's going to be very mild, and now it's going to plunge and be near freezing right around game time. So you have that aspect of it where a dome team is going to come in here and try to play in freezing weather. I do not see the Atlanta Falcons scoring a ton of points. So just by that fact alone, the Eagles are going to be in the football game. And maybe it's a special teams play, maybe it's a defensive play, maybe it's a strip sack, something of that nature. They're going to have an opportunity to win this football game even without Carson Wentz.
Matt also said, Matt Tabik said low-scoring game. I've seen a lot of people out there indicate that they think it could be a low-scoring game. Who does a low-scoring game favor?
Well, I think it favors the Eagles at this point because the Falcons are more explosive. They do have the better quarterback. They have Julio Jones. They have the running backs. They have all the weapons. And even though the Eagles have some good players on offense, they don't have the quarterback to get them football. So I said since the beginning of this, the Eagles didn't want to match up with a team that could score a heck of a lot of points because if it did go the way of a shootout, that's not a good situation for them. It's going to probably, test the heart rate of a lot of people in the Philadelphia area because it is going to be a one-score game. It is going to be a grinded-out, 60-minute type football game. But the fact that it is probably going to be low-scoring, that certainly favors the Eagles.
John, I've seen a lot of people throughout the week as they talk about this matchup and talk about this game. A lot of the predictions are starting to come out. Without giving your prediction away, I do want to ask you about what are the people seeing that are up in the NovaCare complex? Because I have been up there. Of course, I've been ill too. I've been off the show for a couple days. But what are people seeing, or what are you seeing up there that people are leaning toward the Eagles? It almost seems like the national media was all going toward Atlanta, and then some of the local media were going a little bit in the Atlanta favor, maybe the Eagles' favor if they played well, and now that pendulum seems to have swung a little bit. What's come out of the last 2 or 3 days that you think is moving that needle?
Well, I think if you talk to a number of the players that have shown supreme confidence, and a lot of it is the way they played at home this season. A lot of it is that they know how loud and how difficult it is to play in South Philadelphia. And they're very comfortable playing here, and they know it's going to be very difficult for Atlanta to come here and play in that type of environment. So I think they're embracing this sort of we against the world mentality, and the fact that they're the first number 1 seed to be an underdog. They have signs posted in the NovaCare complex, so when they say they're not paying attention to it, Nigel Bradham let that cat out of the bag. They are paying attention to it. And when you talk to the core players, the leaders of this team, they just seem very confident.
Johnny Max with us here, John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter, looking at some video of Minnesota. It's snowing profusely right now up there, so that's the kind of weather that the Saints and the Vikings looking at. John just talked about the potential weather change.
Outside.
Yeah, well, they do have the indoor building there. The Eagles, of course, are outside, which means, the propensity, John, to run the ball, and obviously that's been a big topic of conversation this week. But Jay Ajayi seems like he is embracing, that he kind of want. I mean, some people have suggested that maybe they held him off a little bit for this, but I don't know, man. I mean, you get in the heat of the battle, it's hard to say I'm going to hold back some bullets if I have those bullets there. So do we really feel that Doug has been holding Jay back throughout the course of his tenure here, or maybe they just didn't feel he was up to speed? How do you surmise the way that they have used him, and if that will ultimately change come Saturday?
No, I don't think they've held him back at all. Obviously, in Week 17 they did. They're trying to manage. He's had a chronic knee issue since his days at Boise State, so that part of it. But from when he got here, they were just very comfortable with the committee approach. And remember, it had been successful when Jay got here. The Eagles were running the football very well. So Doug constantly said, if it's not broke, he's not going to fix it. I think as they got through the self-scout of the bye week and kind of look at what went on against Oakland and in the 4 series against Dallas with Nick Foles at quarterback, I think Frank Reich and Doug came to the realization that we're going to have to go about this a different way. And I think it has more to do with that and the fact that they know, despite the mantra when Carson's injury first happened, you remember it was nothing changes. Everybody repeated that. Well, things have to change. Now they realize it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be close to being the same with the quarterback situation. So you have to go about winning a football game a different way. Jay Ajayi had success with Miami against Atlanta. He's a big bruising back. If you look at Atlanta schematically, they're undersized at the linebacker position. And as I said, it's going to be freezing weather. So in theory, there's a potential at least that the Eagles can pound the football and run it. And I think that's the best plan to get out of this game with a win. And I think the Eagles realize it. I don't think it has anything to do with holding him back for this situation. I just think they came to the conclusion that this is the way we got to go about it.
It's interesting. We were talking about Foles earlier in the show and how the perception based on that Dallas game has made everybody kind of, not have as much buzz or excitement. And really, if Torrey Smith catches that ball, it's almost like everybody's like, probably feels a whole heck of a lot different, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, they probably go on and score in that drive. And
they might have scored on that play.
At that point, if they do that, they could pull Nick Foles at that point, and you'd never see the horrid 3 series after that. So you never know how things go.
Right. If he throws that pass and leads them right down and gets, okay, we went down on 1 possession, scored, because he looked good up to that drop, really. They moved right down the field.
Yeah, and I'm not as concerned about that because it only was a quarter of football. I'm more concerned about the game before that, and that's Oakland, because he was not good throughout 4 quarters there, and that obviously continued for the short window against Dallas. But that, to me, is the larger concern. And a lot of it had to do with the weather. But I'll remind people this. The Eagles won that football game. And I would argue if Nick plays the entire game, they probably beat Dallas. It's going to be ugly, but they probably find a way to score 10 points. They're probably going to win that game. And that's what I'm talking about in these bad weather type of atmospheres in Philadelphia. It's really difficult for the other team as well. So it might be ugly, but if you get the win in an ugly fashion, who cares?
Who cares?
A win is a win in this league.
Right.
John McMullen with us. So, John, Mike and I were talking a little bit about maybe the Falcons trying to stack the box, anticipating that the Eagles are going to want to run the football and then basically forcing Nick Foles to beat them, which then leads me to a little bit, since we're talking about that Torrey Smith drop, Nick's relationship with his receivers. And I thought Mike said something interesting earlier in the program where he talked about, Alshon Jeffrey never feels like he's covered, right? He always feels like, throw the ball up, I'll go get it. Whereas Nick Foles prefers his receivers to be open. He doesn't throw them open. He wants them to be open, and then he throws. Would you agree with that assessment that Mike made?
Yeah, in fact, I've been echoing that for the past couple weeks. When I watch Nick, that's what I see. an anticipatory guy. He does like open receivers. He's not going to throw receivers open. So I think that's fair to say. And I think he's not, he's not Nolan Ryan. He doesn't have the fastball. He's not Brett Favre. So he's not going to get the ball outside the numbers when it's a bad weather day. People look at him and say he's 6'6", and he's this big guy, and they assume he's got this big arm. He doesn't. He's got an average NFL arm, and it becomes really, really difficult. So I think, his purview is sort of the middle of the field, and Zach Ertz and Nelson Aguilar, especially in bad weather.
And is that where the disconnect has come between him and Jeffrey? I mean, I know they did connect for a touchdown in the Giants game, but do you think that's part of the issue between those guys not connecting more?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a big part of it, in that maybe Doug and Frank have to sort of move Alshon around a little bit if you want to get the football in his hands. He does play in the slot occasionally because they do a lot of different things formationally, but maybe you have to increase that number. Maybe you have to get him closer to the quarterback because Nick isn't comfortable throwing it outside the numbers. So that's sort of the self-scout stuff that they did during the bye week, and maybe we'll see some of that.
We'll leave you with this, John. The Sixers are in London today. The Eagles will be there tomorrow, not literally tomorrow, but next year on either October the 21st or October the 28th. It'll be tea and crimpets for the Eagles fans because they're going to play the Jaguars in London. It was only a matter of time before the Eagles got pegged for one of these games, but we now know it'll be 2018.
Yeah, and it's going to be at Wembley Stadium. And in a lot of ways, Jay Ajayi's going to be the face of that because he's obviously from London. And so that'll be a big thing, not only for the league, but for him. And the good thing for Philadelphia is, one of the things that when the Eagles made the deal to get Lincoln Financial Field built, one of the contingencies was that they could not play a home game anywhere else. So this is a road game. So the Eagles do not have to give up a home game to go to London. A lot of fans are always concerned about that, but that will be a Jacksonville home game. So the Eagles will have the full contingency of home games, and that's always good when you go to London.
All right, John, plenty more. Tomorrow we'll get John's pick for the game and all the NFL playoff games, which you can hear right here on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. And don't forget to vote for John McMullen for your favorite Sports Bash segment for the Sports Bash Awards, which Teron Davenport was really angry with me that he was not on the ballot. Did you let that slip, John?
I was not involved. I didn't know I was in the lead, but I would have beat Teron. I would have beat Teron. He knows that.
All right, man. We'll talk tomorrow.
I like the confidence.
We'll talk tomorrow, pal.
All right, thanks, guys.